Hey guys, welcome back to the Met with Princess. Thank you so much for joining me today. There is so much to get into because we're about to get into the story of Jeffrey Epstein and Lex Wexner, aka Epstein's biggest benefactor. Some actually pinpoint Leslie Wexner as the main conspirator that Jeffrey Epstein had, the guy that basically platformed him and gave him the money, the finances, and properties to maintain his business and his trafficking scheme. So let's get into this mind-bending story. Let's start with who is Lex Wexner. Lex Wexner, born September 8th, 1937, is an 88-year-old American billionaire and founder of L Brands. He's responsible for building a fashion empire, including Victoria's Secret, Bath and Body Works, and Express. He is based out of Ohio and a prominent philanthropist. L Brands was formerly known as Limited Brands, and this is an umbrella company for many other brands that we know today and are extremely popular, like Victoria's Secret and Bath and Body Works, which is like basically in every single mall in America. Wexner founded the Limited in 1963 in Columbus, Ohio, and he started this company with only a $5,000 loan, and then he later expanded it to what it is today. He is actually one of the people credited for changing the landscape of fashion retail by focusing on specialty stores and fast fashion. But he didn't grow this incredibly profitable and successful empire all by himself. He actually managed to gain this much success thanks to the help of his dear old friend, Jeffrey Epstein. So how did Jeffrey Epstein meet Lex Wexner, one of the most influential people at that time? Well, it all started in West Palm Beach, as many things do. One day in 1986, Leslie Wexner is hanging out with his dear old friend, Robert Meister, in West Palm Beach. They're hanging out, driving around, when suddenly they go back to their hotel. And when they return to their hotel, they pull up to the front, they get out so the valet can park their car, and they just suddenly seem to run into Jeffrey Epstein, just standing there nonchalantly in the front of the hotel. Jeffrey Epstein apparently somewhat knew Robert Meister because he comes up to him and introduces himself. And this is where Robert Meister, as a polite gesture, just casually introduces Jeffrey Epstein to Leslie Wexner. And what's super crazy is that we really didn't have any of these details up until February 2026, when Leslie Wexner sat down for a deposition. And he detailed these meetings with Jeffrey Epstein and how it all began. So this first encounter at the West Palm Beach Hotel was very brief, and it was just a casual introduction. Leslie Wexner did not think much of it. And it was a year later when Jeffrey Epstein so happened to board the same exact flight that Robert Meister was on. In 1987, Robert Meister decides to take a flight from New York to West Palm Beach. And as we know, this is also a flight that Jeffrey Epstein is known to have taken because he had ties to New York and to West Palm Beach. So it doesn't seem so far-fetched that they might just so happen to be taking the same flight. But this is where it gets super suspicious. They apparently, somehow, just by a stroke of luck, Jeffrey Epstein so happened to have gotten the seat right next to Robert Meister. And that's where I really don't believe that that's a chance encounter. Maybe I could have bought that the flight was a coincidence and they just happened to have the same flight, but the fact that they literally had the same seats next to each other, there is no way that that was a chance encounter and just a coincidence. To me, in my opinion, it does feel like Jeffrey Epstein planted himself in that airport, in that flight, right next to Robert Meister, because that is exactly the money move that he needed to make in order to get the funds and the lifestyle that he so desperately desired. I mean, let's just take a note for a moment. Jeffrey Epstein is flying a commercial flight. This is the man now known to have many private jets. Let's take note that at this moment before meeting Leslie Wexner, Jeffrey Epstein is flying like everyone else in a commercial flight, just like your average Joe. And it feels to me that this is because he didn't have his piggy bank yet, aka Leslie Wexner. So Jeffrey Epstein is sitting next to Robert Meister in this flight from New York to West Palm Beach. And during this flight, Jeffrey Epstein does not skip a beat, he doesn't miss a step, he is there for business. So the entire time, he is talking Robert Meister's ear up. He is boasting and just going on about his intensive knowledge in finance. And whatever Jeffrey Epstein said to this man was apparently enough to convince him that he was a genius in this field and had knowledge and expertise beyond his experience, because at this point, Jeffrey Epstein really didn't have that much experience with finance. His resume was not that extensive, but he surely talked a big game because he was able to manipulate Robert Meister into believing that this man was a genius. And eventually, in conversations with Lex Wexner, when Wexner expressed how he was going through some difficult times as his businesses were expanding and it was getting a bit tougher to handle that much finances, well, Robert Meister had the guy in mind. He knew exactly who Wexner should go to seek financial assistance. And that, of course, was Jeffrey Epstein. At some point, according to Lex Wexner in his 2026 deposition, he took up Robert Meister on his suggestion and contacted Jeffrey Epstein. During this closed-door deposition in February 2026, Wexner recounted that the first in-person meeting took place when his friend, insurance executive Robert Meister, stopped his car in the driveway of the Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach. Meister spotted Epstein there and introduced the two men. The physical meeting was preceded by a chance encounter on a commercial flight from New York to Palm Beach. Robert Meister happened to sit next to Epstein on this flight and was so impressed by Epstein's self-representation as a financial expert that he later suggested Wexner contact him. Wexner stated that he gave the brief driveway introduction no particular thought initially, and that it was only about a year later that his personal finances became increasingly complex, that he officially engaged Epstein on Meister's recommendation. Following this introduction, the relationship grew extremely close very quickly. The relationship grew so close, in fact, that Epstein eventually moved into properties originally owned or developed by Wexner. This is, of course, including the Herbert N. Strauss House in Manhattan and a home on the Wexner estate in New Albany, Ohio. The relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Lex Wexner was defined by a level of access that several investigators have called unprecedented for a financial advisor. Lex Wexner was apparently just so overwhelmed with all of his finances that he just had to hire Jeffrey Epstein as his financial advisor. And Wexner was already very successful before he met Epstein. Obviously, that's why he needed financial advice. But the thing is that Wexner already had a financial advisor. And even with that, Jeffrey Epstein was able to weasel his way in there and get control of everything. And I mean everything. This story is actually pretty insane. Like, how was Jeffrey Epstein able to maneuver his way in the middle of all of Lex Wexner's finances, literally a billionaire? It's alleged that Jeffrey Epstein used many different psychological manipulation tactics in order to control Lex Wexner. Apparently, Jeffrey Epstein convinced Lex Wexner to grant him unprecedented control over his fortune through a combination of psychological manipulation, social maneuvering, and a specific savior tactic that successfully isolated the billionaires from other advisors. And according to Lex Wexner himself, Jeffrey Epstein used a few key strategies in order to take control. Some of those strategies include the savior tactic, and it's one of Epstein's most effective methods. He convinced his wealthy clients that their current advisors were incompetent or actually stealing from them. Epstein specifically won Wexner over by claiming his then financial advisor, Harold Levin, was misappropriating funds, despite the fact that Harold told Wexner that he smelled a rat. Wexner still fired him anyway and put Epstein in charge. Then, of course, he would create an aura of legitimacy. Epstein carefully used his connection with other high-profile individuals to make it seem as though he were a member of the global elite. Wexner stated that this curated circle made Epstein appear highly credible and sophisticated, even though his actual financial experience was quite thin. Then, of course, Epstein would handle the unpleasant work. Epstein made himself indispensable by handling the projects and work that Wexner rather not deal with. There are certain business projects that Wexner preferred not to deal with, such as managing the construction of his massive yacht, Limitless, and dealing with difficult real estate developers. All of those job duties were left to Epstein. And this, of course, strengthened their bond and connection to the point where Epstein was granted total life management of Wexner. By 1991, Epstein had convinced Wexner to sign over full power of attorney, an extremely rare delegation for a financial advisor. This apparently allowed Wexner to focus on building his company, while Epstein handled everything else, from signing tax returns to hiring personal staff. And apparently, there was a lot of emotional loyalty going on there for some reason. It's clear to see that their relationship wasn't all business. There was a lot of personal connection and ties there, and we know the type of person that Jeffrey Epstein is, so that tells you what type of person Lex Wexner is. I mean, there is a saying that you are the company you keep for a reason. Where there's smoke, there is fire. Wexner once publicly even stated that Epstein is one of his most loyal friends and has excellent judgment. Jeffrey Epstein was built off the back of Lex Wexner. Everything that he had seemed to be stemming from Lex Wexner, including his many properties that he used as a sex trafficking ring. One of the most prolific pieces of property that Lex Wexner allegedly gifted to Jeffrey Epstein was his Manhattan mansion. The Herbert N. Strauss house at 9 East 71 Street was bought by Wexner's company at about $13.2 million in 1989. And in the mid-90s, it was transferred to an entity controlled by Epstein for virtually nothing. Literally, it was stated that the property was gifted to Epstein for $0. Then we have the New Albany estate. Epstein had his own residence, like literally he was part of the family, on Wexner's massive estate in New Albany, Ohio. And this allowed him constant physical access to Lex Wexner. And he was right there in the center of the business operation. And of course, there is the Paris apartment. Lex Wexner owned a luxury Paris apartment, which Epstein eventually took over and used as his primary European residence. And it was in 1991 where Lex Wexner signed over full power of attorney to Jeffrey Epstein. This is like a blank check level of control over Wexner's entire life and future, because Jeffrey Epstein was also named as Lex Wexner's children's trustee. With Jeffrey Epstein having full power of attorney over Lex Wexner's life, he was able to sign checks in Wexner's name, borrow tens of millions of dollars, and buy or sell property in Wexner's name without ever actually needing his signature. He also had authority to hire and fire Wexner's personal staff, his business partners, accountants, and lawyers, effectively gatekeeping anyone from getting near Wexner. He even had full philanthropic control over Wexner's foundations. Epstein was made the trustee of the Wexner Foundation, giving him influence over how Wexner's charitable millions were distributed. Wexner later testified in February 2026 that he eventually discovered Epstein had misappropriated vast sums, reportedly over $46 million, from his family funds before they finally parted ways in 2007. It's so insane how Lex Wexner is constantly blaming Jeffrey Epstein for taking or misappropriating or stealing so much money. Sometimes it's like 200 million, sometimes it's 46 million. The number always changes, but the fact is that he always uses Jeffrey Epstein as a scapegoat to explain away why so much of his money just goes missing. And that seems pretty easy to me, right? It seems like Lex Wexner just has this handy dandy fall guy to take the blame for all of his misdeeds. It's just my opinion, but I believe that Lex Wexner is way smarter than he lets on. And he is not just an empty shell. Like, I feel this dude knew exactly what he was doing, and maybe he signed everything off to Epstein to blame everything on Epstein and to have Epstein just be his fall guy. So when everything came crumbling down like it did, Lex Wexner can just stroll away into the sunset with no problems, like he did. Like, Leslie Wexner could claim all day long that Jeffrey Epstein is a master manipulator and a psychological genius in order to like worm his way into his brain and like make him sign full control over his entire life. But I don't entirely believe that. I believe that Leslie Wexner was fully aware of Jeffrey Epstein's behavior and business and literally funded every part of it. It's just mind-blowing that this relationship with Wexner was so deep and probably dark and twisted that it even led to Jeffrey Epstein having full control over the finances of Wexner's children. So not only was he named as the trustee of the Wexner Foundation, he was also the primary manager of several trusts for Wexner's children. And Jeffrey Epstein's connection to Lex Wexner's children is primarily financial and structural. But there is one document that was included in the Epstein files where Lex Wexner and his family, including his children, were documented going to visit Epstein at his personal private island. So what does it mean to be the trustee of Wexner's Children's Trust? Well, he was actually named as the trustee for several of the children's trust that was established for Wexner's 4 children. And this gave Jeffrey Epstein voting power on millions of dollars worth of shares in L Brands, which is the parent company of Victoria's Secret. Swiss banking documents and SEC filings also identified Epstein as the manager of these family entities, allowing him to control assets that were intended for the Wexner's children's long-term wealth. And in 2006, where the allegations against Jeffrey Epstein became too prominent to ignore, Wexner's wife, Abigail Wexner, began asking questions and looking closely into their finances. It was in 2007 when she began auditing their finances, and she discovered that Jeffrey Epstein had misappropriated vast funds from their family accounts. Abigail Wexner claims that Jeffrey Epstein initially tried to gaslight her into believing that she just did not understand how finances work, but they were able to recover $100 million in a settlement in 2008. And this was a private settlement, so the details were not really known, again, until this 2026 deposition. It seems like 2008 was a really busy year for Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers. I would love to see what their retainer was at. And although Wexner loves to try and distance himself as much as possible from Jeffrey Epstein, the ties are deep, my guy. Like the blood runs thick, so to speak. During his February 2026 congressional deposition, Wexner admitted that he, his wife, and his children all visited Epstein's island, Little St. James, on at least one occasion shortly after it was purchased. Wexner went on to describe the island as just kind of a peculiar thing and just a pile of rocks, stating that he never witnessed any misconduct or the presence of minor girls ever while he was there. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein was literally part of Wexner's family, at least in my opinion. I mean, it went way beyond finances. Reports suggest that Epstein acted as an informal advisor on broader family matters. Wexner even replaced his own mother for Jeffrey Epstein on the board of the Wexner Foundation. Wexner added that his visit to Jeffrey Epstein's island was very brief and that it only lasted about 2 hours. And they just happened to stop by one casual morning while they were cruising around the area with their family on his boat. And there is a lot of congressional skepticism. Democratic lawmakers on the Oversight Committee expressed a lot of skepticism, noting that Wexner's name appears in the Epstein files thousands of times, and that his support was instrumental to Epstein's operations. And although Wexner was identified by law enforcement as a potential co-conspirator in a 2019 FBI document, he has never been charged. And again, it's thanks to the Epstein files where we have new evidence pointing to Lex Wexner not just being duped like he claims, but actually being a willing participant. There is a cryptic message that Jeffrey Epstein sent to Lex Wexner that, in my opinion, completely confirms everything that we think about Lex Wexner. And despite this 100 million settlement that Lex Wexner and Abigail Wexner received from Jeffrey Epstein and their claims of being completely duped by him, the Epstein files have provided significant new details on both the legal actions against Lex Wexner and the cryptic gang stuff referenced in Jeffrey Epstein's private emails. As of April 2026, 11 survivors have filed a lawsuit against Lex Wexner. This is a major civil lawsuit, and it's filed against Lex Wexner, the Wexner Foundation, and the entity that owned Epstein's Manhattan mansion. The lawsuit argues that Wexner was more than just a victim of theft. It alleges that he was a conspirator who provided the essential funding and infrastructure, claiming to be roughly around 200 million and a Manhattan mansion that Epstein used to build his sex trafficking network. The case was filed under New York's Gender Motivated Violence Act, which allows victims of sexual violence to sue not just their direct abusers, but also the institutions or individuals who facilitated the abuse. Wexner's legal team continues to vigorously defend against these claims, stating that there is no factual basis for the lawsuit and reiterating that Wexner was duped by a world-class con man. But that statement doesn't align at all with the private emails that Jeffrey Epstein and Lex Wexner had. In a draft letter released in the Epstein files, Epstein writes to Wexner saying, "You and I had gang stuff for over 15 years." While the exact meaning and definition of this phrase remains unknown, investigators believe that the term was used by Epstein as leverage. Epstein is reminding Wexner of their shared secrets and connections and history, suggesting that they owe each other a great debt. The note indicates that Jeffrey Epstein claims to have protected Lex Wexner and that he stood up to Abigail Wexner when she came to him and questioned him about the missing finances. Epstein said that he covered for Wexner when Abigail came asking questions, and that Epstein would never give Wexner up or put him in any harm because he just cares for the man so much. I mean, they seem to be practically like brothers. Congressional investigators have pointed to this phrasing as evidence of a deeper, more collaborative relationship than the client-advisor dynamic Wexner has publicly been describing. During his deposition, Wexner was also asked about roughly 1.3 billion in stock sales that Epstein handled on his behalf. And Wexner, of course, being the oopsie daisies guy, he has no idea about any finances or any specific amounts of numbers. A separate Senate Financing Committee investigated and reviewed a Treasury file that showed 4,725 wire transfers totaling over $1 billion flowing in and out of a single JP Morgan account belonging to Epstein for over a decade. Investigators maintain that virtually all of Epstein's finances and wealth originated from fees that he paid himself from Wexner's funds or direct misappropriation. Or like Wexner's not that dumb and just did business with Jeffrey Epstein and gave him money for... well, that's up for debate for what. Let's dive a little deeper into exactly what it is that Lex Wexner said in this February 2026 deposition. Representative Robert Garcia argued that Wexner played a central role in financing Epstein. He said that there is no single person that was more involved in providing Jeffrey Epstein with the financial support to commit his crimes than Lex Wexner. He continued on to say that it's about $1 billion that was either transferred, provided in stocks or given directly to Mr. Epstein by Wexner. And of course, Wexner claims that he has no idea how much funds actually moved between them, but I believe that he's just trying to minimize exactly how close these two men got over the 2 decades that they knew each other. And it's Garcia who left us with this very powerful message. He said that we should be very clear that there would be no Epstein Island. There would be no Epstein plane. There would be no money to traffic women and girls. Mr. Epstein would not be the wealthy man that he was without the support of Lex Wexner. Here are some of the things that Lex Wexner said in the February 2026 deposition that honestly do not make any sense to me. First of all, I just want to say something that I noticed from reading his deposition is that there is a very strange and close relationship between Abigail Wexner, Leslie Wexner's wife, and Jeffrey Epstein. Like, for some reason, Abigail seems to be the one questioning Epstein and talking to Epstein and trying to get in the middle of this relationship. And it just seems strange to me how involved that she is in the finances. Like, why is it that she's the one having to step forward and say that Epstein is stealing funds, misappropriating funds, being a thief, a con man? Why is it that Abigail has to say all of these things? Why can't Lex Wexner see that? Why is he not the one saying like, oh my God, Jeffrey Epstein's stealing my money. He's taking control of my things. Like, why is he not the one standing 10 toes down for his own finances? Like, his wife is fighting this battle for him. A battle that it seems Lex Wexner wants nothing to do with. And if what Jeffrey Epstein wrote in his notes is factual, then that means that Lex Wexner was knowingly misappropriating his own funds and Jeffrey Epstein was just covering up for him. But that's just what it seems to me. You guys form your own opinion. Let me read to you a little bit about this relationship with Abigail and Epstein. So apparently in late 2006, Epstein told Abigail that he had a legal issue in Palm Beach, but insisted that what he referred to as a baseless, trumped-up charge by an over-aggressive police chief would be dismissed. In 2007, however, Epstein informed Abigail that this situation could become messy and that he might have to spend some time away. To say the least, this was shocking. At the time, Epstein suggested that Abigail could handle our personal finances if he were to become unavailable, and for the first time, he provided her with the financial information that she would need. First of all, aren't there financial advisors who have a whole career dedicated to this type of work? Why is Epstein not giving this information to an actually accredited financial advisor? Why is he just handing everything over to Abigail, Lex Wexner's wife? As far as I know, she's not a financial advisor. And let me just add, if it wasn't clear, what I'm reading are Lex Wexner's words. This is what he wrote down in his deposition. He is admitting that Jeffrey Epstein was in close communication with his wife and was giving her their personal financial information. I don't know, something really feels super off about this entire situation. Like, first of all, why doesn't Lex Wexner have all of this information himself? And then why doesn't he give it to Abigail if he wants her to have it? Why doesn't he give it to her? Why is it that Jeffrey Epstein has to be the one to give it to her? And for the first time ever, she has this information. Strange, but let's continue. He resumed explaining that due to the complexity of the information, it took time to unravel, but after reviewing the information, it became clear to Abigail. What? Like, yeah, what do you mean, the complexity of the information? I'm sure these are pages and pages of numbers and finances and transfers and taxes and wires and all this type of stuff that, yeah, a financial advisor should be looking at. I'm not really sure why Abigail would be tasked into looking through all of this information and trying to make sense of it herself. Unless, of course, that's what she wanted to do. Unless, of course, that might have been the ploy all along. Maybe Jeffrey Epstein was blackmailing Wexner and dangling that little carrot in front of him, like telling him, if you don't help me with X, Y, and Z, I'm giving everything to your wife, and she's gonna know exactly how dirty you are. And maybe Wexner did help Epstein and throw him a bone. And maybe that's why he was able to finance his incredibly unprecedented, once-in-a-lifetime non-prosecution deal that he was able to garner from the Southern District of Florida in 2008. And maybe that's why Jeffrey Epstein covered for Lex Wexner and ended up settling with him in court for $100 million, just so that all of this can go away for Lex Wexner and he wouldn't have to be further dragged down by this situation. I don't know, but the dots are dotting. Wexner continued saying that after reviewing the information, it became clear to Abigail that Epstein had stolen vast sums from their family. Once I learned of his abusive conduct and theft from my family, I never spoke with Epstein again. Never. Here's another strange interaction with Abigail. He says, confronted with his financial wrongdoing by Abigail, Epstein agreed to and did return a substantial amount of money, even while continuing to maintain his total innocence of any wrongdoing. Never dropping the con, says Wexner. He also went on to clear up a rumor. He said, I did not give Epstein the New York townhouse. He purchased it from me for what I was told was the appraised value. And he also said, I visited Epstein's island only once shortly after he purchased it when Abigail, our young children, and I stopped for a few hours one morning while we were on a cruise on our boats. Again, the side of Epstein that he chose to reveal to me was far different from the predator he eventually was exposed to be. I don't think Jeffrey Epstein is that talented or that big of an actor to hide exactly his true self from Wexner for decades. Like, you really mean to tell me that this is the most talented actor, Oscar-winning man who has never performed a day in his life, but had everyone fooled around him? Like, LOL, no, literally everyone knew this is the problem. That his crimes and activities were very known, and nothing was being done to stop him. That's why people are so outraged right now, because it was fully well known who Jeffrey Epstein was and the things that he did, and nothing was ever done to stop him. Most of the investigations that we're seeing today in 2026, it's the investigation into why Jeffrey Epstein wasn't stopped, why his public crimes, allegations, and activities weren't stopped at the time, why he was allowed to continue on with his operations under everyone's noses while victimizing hundreds, thousands of girls and women on a daily basis across the country. And he even took his crimes overseas across international waters and into different countries. If there's one thing Jeffrey Epstein was shy about his crimes. Lex Wexner goes on to describe himself and a little bit about his history. He said that he founded the Limited Stores in 1963 with a $5,000 loan from his aunt Ida. He said, I grew the company from one small store, the Limited, by creating, acquiring, and leading the development of a large multi-divisional retail company of brands such as Express, Bath & Body Works, Victoria's Secret, Lerner, Lane Bryant, Abercrombie & Fitch, and Henry Benzel. He said that he took the company public in 1969 and was the longest-serving CEO of a publicly traded company at the time of his retirement in 2020. So you mean to tell me that the longest-serving CEO was actually a box of rocks being controlled and manipulated by one of the most heinous criminals in history? Make it make sense. So I did a little bit of research on Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan mansion. Yeah, the one that Lex Wexner gifted to him allegedly back in the day. This is a 21,000 square foot mansion in Manhattan located at 9 East 71st Street. This lot is restricted to specific commercial or civic uses. Like, for example, it could be used as an embassy residence or for nonprofit foundations or non-commercial art galleries. And this is due to its historic landmark destination, the intense elite residential zoning laws, and its its history as a high security facility used for criminal activity. This property is known as one of the largest private homes in Manhattan. It's in a prestigious residential area, and this limits its use to non-traditional white glove commercial operations or diplomatic non-profit purposes to maintain the character of the neighborhood while allowing high-profile occupants. Currently, due to its immense size and high traffic use as a criminal scene, zoning may prevent its use as a standard single-family home by discouraging high-occupancy residential use, instead prioritizing low-occupancy administrative or non-profit functions. The townhouse was sold in 2021 for $51 million, and the proceeds are designated to go to the Victim Compensation Fund. And this highlights its transformation from a private home into a liquidated asset for restitution. And this restrictive zoning does serve a purpose. It's there to ensure that the building is not subdivided into smaller residential apartments, preserving its massive single property status. And unlike the New Mexico Zorro Ranch, the Manhattan mansion was searched in 2019. During the July 2019 FBI raid of Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, agents seized a vast collection of digital evidence, high-value assets, and disturbing personal items. Agents used a saw to open a lock safe in a fifth-floor dressing room, which contained approximately $70,000 in cash and 48 loose diamonds. Multiple passports were also found, including an expired foreign passport with Epstein's photo, but a different name, and an address in Saudi Arabia. They also found lots of hard drives and CDs that they recovered. I mean, the digital evidence and surveillance equipment that they recovered was immense. Dozens of digital devices, including 14 computers, laptops, USB drives, and hundreds of CDs were found in binders, many with handwritten labels, and many of the handwritten labels on the CD were disturbing and include keywords that you could probably guess. Pre-existing security cameras were also found throughout the property, including in bedrooms and in the massage rooms. And I need to add, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in 2019 for the crimes that he was accused of back in 2006. Like, he wasn't arrested for anything dating after 2006. Like, for example, it's not like in 2016 or something, someone came forward and said something, or in 2017 or 2018 or 2010. When he was arrested in New York in 2019, he was being arrested for those same crimes that he was accused of in 2006. The crimes where he was given the non-prosecution agreement, well, that non-prosecution agreement was stripped in New York, and they charged him for those specific crimes. But I'm just asking myself, and I'm truly wondering, because I don't believe that Jeffrey Epstein stopped his crimes after he got out of jail in 2008. It's my opinion, my belief, he clearly had his island, he still had his private jets, he still had his properties in Texas, in New York, in West Palm Beach, in Paris, in Ohio. He still had all of these properties that he obtained so far, and he had his private jets and his island. He still had everything. I think, in my opinion, that he still continued his crimes. Like, what I truly don't understand, and I am still wondering, how come there aren't any new accusations? Because, like, if he continued with his crimes and his operation the way I believe he did, I feel like there would be so much more evidence that is recent that he could have been charged for on top of everything in 2006. How about the crimes that he committed from 2008 all the way up to 2019? Where are those accusations? Where are those crimes? Did nothing happen? Did he just actually turn into a saint after 2008? Where are those victims? Because I believe there are more victims, and I believe that crimes happened during those times as well. That seems really bizarre to me, especially when I saw the 2019 pictures that they took inside of Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan mansion. They took this photograph of inside his massage room, and to me, it looks like it is a setup for a massage. This room does not look like it's collecting dust. It doesn't look like it's a storage room. It doesn't look like it hasn't been visited since 2006. That's clearly a room that is being used still to the day. Jeffrey Epstein was actually arrested getting off of his private jet in Manhattan. So in his head, he was on his way to his Manhattan mansion. He was about to go home and chill and likely get a massage, because it was that same night when FBI agents went to his Manhattan mansion, broke down his front door, went in there and took all the evidence, took all the pictures, and we can see that his massage room was set up for him. It was ready. It had fresh linens draped on the massage bed. It looked like someone was about to walk into that room and get a massage. So this man is still getting his massages. It doesn't look like he's skipped a beat at all. So who is massaging Jeffrey Epstein in 2019? Are they women over the age of 18? Or is he just hiding his crimes better? Like, what is going on? I am so confused. Jeffrey Epstein might have been a financial advisor, but he desperately needed some decorating advice. Here's some of the decorating choices that Epstein made for his Manhattan mansion. He had a life-size sculpture of a woman in a bridal gown suspended from the ceiling. He also had a display of dozens of framed prosthetic eyeballs in the entryway, which is giving one of the Rothschild famed parties. He also loved his taxidermy. He had many different taxidermied animals everywhere. It was giving Texas Roadhouse in there. He had frame photos featuring various world leaders and public figures displayed in his home. He was very proud of his friends and connections. He also had a very flattering painted picture of Bill Clinton in a blue dress and various other questionable artworks. Plus, he had a fully equipped dentist chair that he kept in one of his bathrooms. The FBI seized a massive amount of digital evidence, including approximately 300 gigabytes, at least 40 computers, 26 storage drives, and 14 laptops. And the DOJ identified 10,000 downloaded videos and images of CP and other abuse materials. Evidence also suggests that a deliberate effort to gather information discreetly, including motion-activated cameras disguised in tissue boxes. While some cameras were found during the 2019 raid, investigators noted that many CPUs and recording units had been removed prior to the search. And this goes back to the cleaning protocol that I talked about in my last video with the New Mexico Zorro Ranch search happening in 2026. It just doesn't make any sense that they would ever find anything when in 2019 there was already proof of evidence being tampered with and taken from the scene before the initial investigation even happened, meaning now in 2026 the odds of finding any evidence left over at the Zorro Ranch is slim to none. And I feel bad for this Manhattan mansion that was dragged into this entire mess, because prior to Jeffrey Epstein and Lex Wexner, this was an amazing, gorgeous property with a rich history. But in 2021, it was put on the market and advertised as a fully restored Gilded Age mansion. It was listed at $80 million, and after several price cuts, someone finally bought it for $49.9 million. Some of the period details for the 1910 Grand Estate include a limestone staircase with a wrought iron railing, original French stained glass windows, and 9 wood-burning fireplaces. But before the Manhattan Mansion became Jeffrey Epstein's house of horrors, there was a secret history involved with this property. The French neoclassical townhouse at 9 East 71st Street is on one of the most fashionable blocks on the Upper East Side. This is not usually the kind of place that you'd see FBI agents raiding homes or using a crowbar to gain access to someone's front door. But the house's 15 feet high oak doors, shaded by Callery pear trees on the north side of the street, bear gouges from that crowbar. And it's the only visual evidence that remains of the raid that took place. And at the same time, Jeffrey Epstein was being arrested at a private jet airport in New Jersey that serves the New York's ruling class. In addition to being a crime scene, questions swirled on how exactly were the circumstances under which Epstein acquired this home. As we know, the previous owner was Lex H. Wexner, the chairman of L Brands, which owns retailers such as Victoria's Secret, and for an unknown reason, Wexner appears to have made a gift of the house to Epstein, transferring the title for a cost of $0. And this was around 1996. And then in 2011, years after Lex Wexner officially claimed he cut ties with Epstein in 2007, which is weird because the property was formally transferred in 2011 from a trust controlled by Wexner and Epstein to a Virgin Island-based entity controlled by just Epstein. Again, this is all while Wexner, meanwhile, is stating that he had cut ties with Epstein years ago. Number 9 had many incarnations along its path to infamy that didn't just include Jeffrey Epstein. 50 feet wide and 7 stories tall, the house was designed by Horace Trumbar, a fashionable residential architect, for Herbert N. Strauss, and whose father had perished on the Titanic 18 years earlier. Trumbar was highly sought after by the stylish rich. It was actually on a Trumbar bathroom floor in Newport, Rhode Island, that Sunny Von Bullough collapsed in 1980, setting off the attempted murder trial of her recently deceased husband, Klaus. And side note, this story is crazy, and I will totally be looking more into it and making a full podcast dedicated to it because it's so interesting. And this case actually set the precedent for so many future cases and is literally the reason why we have search warrants today. The construction of the Strauss mansion began in 1930, but 3 years later, Strauss himself was dead. He had a heart attack at 51, and he never moved into the 40-room mansion. With the death of his client and the onset of the Depression, Trumbaugh's masterpiece was boarded up at 90% complete, and it sat unfinished until 1944. That year, Strauss's son made a gift of it to the Roman Catholic Archbishop of New York, which they used it as a 60-bed annex for St. Clair's Hospital for convalescing soldiers returning from the war. In 1962, it became the Birch Wathen School, which moved out in 1989 when Wexner purchased the property. He bought it for $13.2 million, and at the time, this was a record for townhouse sales in Manhattan. And this is one of the reasons why I find it so hard to believe that Lex Wexner just willy-nilly, out of the goodness and kindness of his heart, just gifted Jeffrey Epstein with this insane property. Like, I believe there was something more there. I believe Jeffrey Epstein either had some crazy blackmail against Lex Wexner or was making Lex Wexner so much money from, well, you know Epstein's business. But I believe that Epstein was either making Wexner a ton of money where this property seemed like pennies to him, or maybe Epstein had some crazy blackmail on Wexner where this was just like a hush-hush property. Like, here, take it. Don't say anything. In fact, let's work together. Let's be best buds. I'm just saying it's giving because Wexner liked this property. Wexner put time and effort and thought behind this property. He went on to renovate the 21,000 square foot interior, and he filled it with expensive artwork by the likes of Picasso. Like, he really put some forethought behind this property because one of the drawing rooms that he designed even made it into the December 1995 cover of the Architectural Digest magazine. Again, note that this was 1995. The very next year in 1996, he just gifts this property to Epstein. That doesn't seem very reasonable. And this property also doesn't seem like a throwaway property. Even if you are a billionaire, I don't understand how he could just like not care for the property enough to gift it to someone. Obviously, he cared for the property. It's a huge investment. It was literally a record-setting purchase for the time in Manhattan. So something big, something major must have happened for Epstein to acquire this property from Wexner. Also, there's there's this like weird little detail that kind of shows that Epstein was having some sort of premonition about his time in jail. According to R. Curie Hay, who's a publicist that visited Epstein at the house 3 months before he was arrested, she said he has a mural on the terrace the whole length of the building of a prison yard with barbed wire and a guard tower. The inmates are out exercising, and he pointed to one and said, "That's me." That's to remind myself that I could go back there. And like clockwork, 3 months later, there he is. Premonition or planned? I don't know. Up to you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please leave me a comment down below on your thoughts. Please stay safe. I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.